The Harpers thought their lives were perfect: loving parents, a beautiful baby, and Max, their loyal golden retriever. But their peace shattered when Max began growling at the same corner of the nursery every single night. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, as if he were guarding against something unseen. One night, Jonathan decided to investigate. He followed Max's unwavering stare and heard it, faint, rhythmic knocking coming from inside the walls. His heart raced. What could it be? A plumbing issue? A harmless rodent? But the deeper they looked, the darker it got. Hidden behind layers of drywall was an old rusted tin box containing chilling relics. A child's photograph, a desperate letter from decades ago, and a secret too horrific to ignore. As the knocking grew louder, the Harpers realized they weren't alone. Max wasn't just protecting their baby. He was uncovering a story of loss, tragedy, and an unseen presence begging to be heard. The crisp autumn air settled over the quiet neighborhood of Cedarwood, Pennsylvania. Inside the Harper household, everything seemed peaceful. Baby Mia, just 3 months old, slept soundly in her crib, her tiny fist clutching a stuffed bear. The faint hum of a ceiling fan mixed with the rustle of falling leaves outside. But downstairs, Max, their loyal golden retriever, was anything but calm. Jonathan Harper, a dedicated software engineer, was lost in his laptop's glow at the kitchen table. Emily, his wife, entered holding a cup of chamomile tea. "John," she said softly, her voice laced with concern, "you should check on Max again. He's been acting strange." Max had been part of the family for 5 years, a rescue dog known for his calm and loyal demeanor. But for the past 2 weeks, his behavior had shifted dramatically. Every night, he stationed himself by Mia's crib, growling softly, his gaze fixed on the same corner of the nursery. "I don't get it," Jonathan sighed, rubbing his temples. "He's never been like this before." Emily nodded. "It's almost like he's warning us about something." Later that night, Jonathan climbed the stairs to check on Max. The nursery was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a nightlight. There he was, Max, sitting rigid by the crib, his golden fur bristling. His low growl broke the stillness of the room, his gaze locked on the far corner. "What is it, boy?" Jonathan whispered, kneeling next to him. He ran a hand over Max's back, feeling the tension rippling through the dog's body. Max didn't flinch. He growled deeper, his ears twitching as though catching something Jonathan couldn't hear. Emily appeared at the doorway, her face pale. "What's wrong with him, John?" Jonathan shook his head. "I don't know," he said, his voice heavy with unease. "But he's sensing something we're not." The next morning, the unease lingered like a heavy fog. Over breakfast, Emily couldn't stop replaying Max's behavior in her mind. "We need to do something, John," she insisted. "This isn't normal." Jonathan nodded, though his own thoughts were tangled. "I'll call Dr. Thompson today," he assured her, referring to their trusted veterinarian. Later that afternoon, they loaded Max into the SUV, his wagging tail a stark contrast to their worried expressions. The drive to the vet was quiet, each of them lost in thought. At the clinic, Dr. Thompson greeted Max with a warm smile. "All right, big guy, let's see what's going on," he said, patting the dog's head. The examination was thorough. Ears, eyes, and every inch of Max's golden coat was checked for signs of illness or discomfort. Finally, Dr. Thompson leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Physically, Max is in perfect health," he explained. "There's nothing wrong with him medically." Jonathan frowned. "Then what's causing this behavior? He's never acted like this before." Dr. Thompson rubbed his chin. "Dogs have heightened senses. He might be hearing or smelling something you can't. Sometimes they pick up on vibrations or even subtle environmental changes. I'd recommend checking Mia's room. There could be something there that's triggering him." On the drive home, Emily voiced what they were both thinking. "What if it's nothing, John? What if Max is just being overly protective?" Jonathan shook his head. "Max doesn't do things without a reason. If he's acting like this, there's something going on." That night, determined to get to the bottom of it, Jonathan decided to stay up and watch Max. With a flashlight in hand, he entered the nursery as Max took his usual position by Mia's crib. Hours passed in silence, the soft sound of Mia's breathing the only noise in the room. But then, just after midnight, Max's ears perked up. His growl started low, rumbling from deep within his chest. Jonathan's pulse quickened. He followed Max's gaze to the corner of the room. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. He pressed his ear to the wall, his breath hitching as he heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping. Jonathan's heart raced as the faint tapping echoed in his ear. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. He stepped back, his mind racing, and called out, "Emily, come here!" Emily hurried into the room, her face etched with concern. "What's wrong?" "Listen," Jonathan said, pointing to the wall. "Right here." Emily pressed her ear to the spot he indicated. Her eyes widened as she gasped. "Is that knocking?" Jonathan nodded, his expression grim. "But where's it coming from?" The two exchanged a nervous glance, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. "We need to figure this out," Jonathan said, grabbing his toolbox from the garage. Emily hesitated. "You're not going to tear the wall down, are you?" "Just a small cut," Jonathan assured her. "If there's something in there, we need to know." With Max still growling softly by Mia's crib, Jonathan carefully marked a section of the drywall and made a small incision. Dust floated in the air as he removed a square piece of the wall. He shone his flashlight into the dark space, his hands trembling slightly. At first it was just insulation, but then something glinted faintly in the beam of light. "What is that?" Emily whispered, leaning closer. Jonathan reached in and pulled out a small, rusted tin box. The surface was scratched and weathered, as though it had been hidden for decades. "I have no idea," he murmured, setting it gently on the floor. Emily knelt beside him, her curiosity mingled with apprehension. Jonathan pried the box open, and its contents made them both freeze. Inside were old photographs, yellowed with age, and a few brittle pieces of paper. A faint, musty smell wafted out. Jonathan picked up one of the photos, his brow furrowing. It showed a little girl, no older than 6, standing in what looked like the same nursery. Her expression was somber, her eyes hollow. Emily held up one of the papers, squinting at the faded handwriting. "It's a letter," she said, her voice trembling. "To whoever finds this, please take care of her. She's all alone now. I'm sorry I couldn't do more." A chill ran down Jonathan's spine. What does this mean? They stared at each other, the mysterious discovery raising more questions than answers. The next morning, the Harpers sat at their kitchen table, the tin box and its mysterious contents spread out before them. Max lay at their feet, unusually quiet, his golden eyes watching their every move. Emily picked up another faded photograph, her hands trembling. It showed the same little girl, this time sitting on the steps of a house that looked eerily familiar. "This has to be our house," she whispered. "It hasn't changed much at all." Jonathan nodded, his brow furrowed. "But who is she? And what happened to her?" He carefully unfolded one of the brittle letters, scanning the hurried, almost frantic handwriting. "Listen to this. She won't stop crying. The knocking gets worse every night. I think she's afraid, but I can't protect her anymore." Emily's face turned pale. "The knocking, just like what we heard. This can't be a coincidence." Determined to find answers, Jonathan called the town's historical society. An older woman named Mrs. Lang answered the phone. "Ah, the Harper residence," she said, her tone thoughtful. "That house has quite the history." Jonathan gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Lang sighed. "It was built in the 1920s by the Carmichael family. They were a quiet couple with one daughter, Lily. But after the war, tragedy struck. The mother passed away and the father, well, he vanished. Lily was left alone. A new family moved in years later, but there were strange reports, knocking sounds, mostly at night. And Lily, she was never seen again." Jonathan's blood ran cold. "Never seen again?" "No," Mrs. Lang replied softly. "People say her presence lingers in that house." That evening, Jonathan shared what he'd learned with Emily. They sat in the nursery, the tin box between them as Max rested at their feet. "Lily was just a child," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. "She must have been so scared." Jonathan stared at the photograph of Lily, her solemn face haunting. If her spirit is still here, maybe Max senses her. He's not growling at something dangerous. He's protecting Mia, just like he tried to protect Lily. Emily glanced at Max, who thumped his tail softly. He's guarding her. Jonathan nodded, his voice steady. But what's the knocking trying to tell us? That night, the knocking returned, louder and more insistent than ever. Max barked sharply, pacing in front of the corner of Mia's nursery, his golden fur bristling. Jonathan grabbed a crowbar and a flashlight, his heart racing. If there's something behind this wall, we need to find it. Emily stood in the doorway, clutching Mia tightly in her arms. Be careful, Jonathan, she said, her voice trembling. With steady hands, Jonathan began prying open more of the drywall. Dust filled the air as Max's growls deepened, his gaze never leaving the corner. Finally, Jonathan's flashlight beam illuminated something unexpected, a small, sealed compartment embedded within the wall. It's a hidden space, Jonathan said, his voice tight with tension. Help me open it. With a few hard pulls, the compartment gave way, revealing a small wooden box, its surface darkened with age. Jonathan set it carefully on the floor, his hands trembling as he opened the lid. Inside was an assortment of items: a child's diary, a lock of hair tied with a ribbon, and a single silver key. Emily knelt beside him, tears filling her eyes as she picked up the diary. This must have been Lily's, she whispered. She opened the brittle pages carefully, her hands shaking as she read aloud. October 31st, 1946. The knocking is louder tonight. Daddy says it's nothing, but I know it's coming for me. I wish Mommy were here. Maybe then I wouldn't be so scared. Jonathan's jaw tightened. She knew something was wrong. She was trying to leave us a message. Emily held up the silver key. Do you think this unlocks something? Maybe there's more to the story. Jonathan nodded, determination hardening his features. We need to keep looking. Examining the room, Jonathan's eyes fell on the floorboards. The knocking sounded low last night, he said. Maybe it's coming from beneath us. He knelt down, tapping on the wooden planks until a hollow sound caught his attention. Carefully, he pried up one of the floorboards, revealing another hidden compartment. Inside was a rusted metal box, its lock matching the size of the silver key. Emily's heart pounded. Open it, she urged. Jonathan inserted the key, and with a soft click, the lock released. Inside the rusted box lay faded documents, a tarnished locket, and a yellowed newspaper clipping. Jonathan carefully unfolded the fragile paper, his eyes scanning the bold headline. Carmichael tragedy, missing girl presumed dead. Emily's hands trembled as she picked up the clipping. Missing, presumed dead, she whispered. Her voice cracked as she read further. They never found her. Jonathan set down the clipping and picked up the locket. He opened it to reveal two small photographs. One showed Lily, her solemn expression eerily familiar. The other was of a woman who must have been her mother. The images stirred a sense of profound sadness in both of them. She's been forgotten, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Left behind by everyone she loved. Max, who had been silent until now, let out a sharp bark, drawing their attention back to the corner of the nursery. His tail wagged tentatively as his golden eyes locked on the small compartment they had uncovered. It was as if he was urging them forward, guiding them to something still hidden. Jonathan placed a steady hand on Max's head. He's trying to tell us there's more. Emily held the locket tightly, her voice trembling. We need to figure out what happened to her. This can't be where her story ends. Determined to uncover the truth, Jonathan and Emily visited Mrs. Lang at the town's historical society the following day. They laid out the diary, the locket, and the newspaper clipping on her desk. Mrs. Lang, her expression somber, examined the items carefully. This is incredible, she said, her voice heavy with emotion. These confirm what many have suspected, but could never prove. Lily Carmichael's disappearance wasn't an accident. Jonathan frowned, his brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean? Mrs. Lang pointed to a passage in Lily's diary. The knocking is louder tonight. It's possible someone was trying to hide her or protect her from something, maybe even her own father. Emily clutched the locket tightly. But why hasn't she moved on? Why does her presence still linger in the house? Mrs. Lang looked at them thoughtfully. Perhaps she's waiting for someone to listen, someone to give her peace. That evening, Jonathan and Emily returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. They carried Lily's belongings carefully into the nursery, placing them beside the crib where Max often stood guard. The room felt heavy with history, as though it bore witness to the unfolding story. Emily knelt by the crib, her voice soft yet firm. If Lily's spirit is still here, we want her to know she's not alone anymore. We'll help her find peace. Jonathan nodded, setting the diary and locket carefully on the small table by the wall. We'll finish what she couldn't. As the couple settled into the living room, the house seemed unusually quiet, almost as if holding its breath. But just as they began to relax, the familiar knocking returned. This time, it was louder, more deliberate, and persistent. Max shot up from his resting place, barking sharply as he rushed back into the nursery. His tail wagged nervously, but his stance was firm. He was protecting something. Jonathan grabbed his crowbar and flashlight, his heart pounding. If there's something else hidden here, we're going to find it. Emily followed him into the nursery, her hands trembling as she held the flashlight steady. The knocking grew louder as Jonathan pried away another section of the wall. The air turned cold and damp, sending a shiver down their spines. Behind the dry wall was a small, sealed crawl space. "Jonathan," Emily whispered, her voice quivering. "What's in there?" Jonathan carefully reached into the space and pulled out a dusty wooden chest. The lid creaked as he opened it, revealing a single letter written in the same frantic handwriting as before. The words were chilling. "If you found this, please forgive me. I couldn't protect her. I failed. But she deserves to rest now. Please let her rest." Emily's breath hitched as tears streamed down her face. She knelt beside the chest, her voice trembling. "Lily, you're safe now. You can rest. We'll make sure no one forgets you." Max let out a soft whine and lay down beside the chest, his golden eyes calm and steady. It was as though he, too, understood that Lily's story had finally been heard. The next morning, Jonathan and Emily contacted Mrs. Lang at the Historical Society, explaining everything they had uncovered. They brought the documents, diary, and locket, carefully laying them out on her desk. Mrs. Lang, her face filled with a mix of awe and sadness, examined the items closely. "This is extraordinary," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "These items confirm so much of what we've suspected, but could never prove. Lily Carmichael's disappearance wasn't an accident." Jonathan leaned forward, his expression intense. "What do you mean? What happened to her?" Mrs. Lang pointed to the final letter. "Whoever wrote this clearly tried to protect her, but something, whether fear, circumstance, or tragedy, prevented them from succeeding. Lily's spirit may have lingered because her story was never told, her memory never honored." Emily clutched the locket tightly. "Then we need to make it right. She deserves peace." Mrs. Lang nodded thoughtfully. "We can create a memorial for Lily, a marker in the local cemetery to ensure her name is remembered. It's time the town acknowledged her story." Over the next few days, the Harpers worked tirelessly with Mrs. Lang to organize a memorial. They pieced together Lily's life, using the diary and photographs to reconstruct her story. As word spread, neighbors and townsfolk began to show interest. Many were moved by the idea of honoring a little girl who had been forgotten for so long. On a crisp autumn afternoon, the memorial ceremony took place beneath an old oak tree in the town cemetery. A small but heartfelt gathering included the Harpers, Mrs. Lang, and several neighbors. A simple plaque was unveiled, engraved with the words, "In memory of Lily Carmichael, 1920 to 1946, gone but not forgotten." Emily, holding baby Mia in her arms, stepped forward to speak. Her voice was steady yet filled with emotion. "Lily was a child who deserved love, safety, and a chance to grow. She was taken too soon, but today we honor her memory. We promise never to let her story fade again." As the ceremony concluded, a gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying a sense of calm over the crowd. Jonathan glanced down at Max, who stood quietly by his side, his golden fur shining in the sunlight. "She's at peace now," Jonathan whispered. Emily nodded, a tear rolling down her cheek. Thanks to Max, he gave her voice back. In the weeks following the memorial, the Harper home felt lighter, as though the heavy weight of Lily's untold story had finally been lifted. Max's behavior changed completely. No more growling, no more restless pacing in the nursery. Instead, he spent his time lying peacefully by Mia's crib, his loyal presence a constant comfort. One evening, as the family sat together in the living room, Emily looked at Jonathan and smiled. Do you ever wonder why Max started acting that way? Why he sensed Lily when we couldn't? Jonathan glanced at Max, who was curled up by the fireplace, his tail wagging lazily. Maybe it's just who he is, Jonathan said, his voice thoughtful. Maybe he knew this family needed him, both us and Lily. Emily placed her hand on Jonathan's. Whatever the reason, I'm grateful. He didn't just protect Mia, he gave Lily her voice back. Time passed, but Lily's memory remained a part of the Harpers' lives. They often visited her memorial, bringing flowers and telling her story to Mia as she grew older. The nursery, once filled with unexplained tension, became a peaceful haven, a symbol of love, protection, and remembrance. Max's role as the family's guardian continued to shine. He was there for every milestone in Mia's life, from her first steps to her first words. His loyalty was unwavering, his golden presence a reminder of the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. The Harpers often marveled at how Max had brought their family closer, not just to each other, but to a past that needed to be uncovered and honored. Though Lily's story began with tragedy, it became a beacon of hope. It showed that even the smallest acts of compassion, a dog's growl, a family's decision to listen, could bring light to the darkest of circumstances. It reminded them that love and care could transcend time and heal even the deepest wounds. As Jonathan watched Max one evening, curled up beside Mia's bed, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He's more than a dog, Jonathan murmured to Emily. He's a part of our family, a part of our story. Emily nodded, her eyes glistening. And so is Lily, always. Their home, once just a house with an untold history, had become a sanctuary of love, trust, and remembrance. A legacy carried forward by one extraordinary dog and the family who chose to listen.